Um, Welcome to today's session of City Scripts, where we're delighted to be launching Sundar Sarukkai's latest novel, Water Days. My name is Ishani, and I'm from the Word Lab team at IIHS. City Scripts is our monthly curation of book talks, panel discussions, lectures, and more that bring the city alive. I'm happy to introduce our speakers for today. Sundar Sarukkai has written across genres, including academic books, plays, newspaper articles, books for children, and novels. He has taught philosophy for 3 decades. He's been a professor at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, founder director of the Manipal Center for Philosophy and Humanities, and visiting faculty at the Indian Institute of Science. He is the founder of the Barefoot Philosophers, driven by the belief that it is necessary and possible to spread philosophical thinking into the larger society. Divya Ravindranath, who's joining us online, is a senior researcher and works at the IIHS School of Human Development. Her research interests lie at the intersection of informal labor, gender, and urban health. Her ongoing research primarily concentrates on provisioning care infrastructure for children of those engaged in the informal economy. C K Meena is a Bangalore based journalist and author. After working in the City Tab and Deccan Herald, she co founded the Asian College of Journalism, where she taught for 6 years. Since 2000, she has written for various local and national publications. 3 of her novels have been published by Drone Quill, and her co authored book was published by Hatchet in 2022. Her travelogue Tripping is available on Kindle. Karthik Venkatesh is an executive editor with Penguin Random House, where he commissions and edits fiction and nonfiction. He is also a writer, and his articles have been featured in several publications. He has 2 books, 10 Indian Languages and How They Came to Be, meant for young adults, and 10 Makers of the Indian Constitution, which was published in January 2025. Thank you all for being here today. You, Sundar, and
Yep. Thank you, Shani. Thank you for this opportunity to come back here once more and, be in the midst of very eminent people to talk about the book and for you to launch this book. Thank you so much. It's always lovely to be here at IIHS. There's very little I want to say before we start, except to say I'm really grateful to all 3 of them for having engaged with the book, for coming here to catalyze some conversations around it. Because I think, as I'm sure so many of you are writers, and we know that it is so important to have community of people who actually are able to talk to each other about what we write. And that is what really makes the fellowship of a writing community happen. And more than anything else, it is just that possibility that all of you have come here this evening, and we have these people who have taken the trouble to read and write and discuss it. That really makes writing this book worth the while. So I'm actually looking very much forward to whatever they want to say about it, and then we'll have an open discussion. And if you have any questions, anything you want to talk about, I will come back and reflect further more on the book once they have had their say. So can I request Meena to start off?
Yeah, so City Scripts, that's right. So this is very much about Bangalore. It's a book not just set in Bangalore, but a specific area of Bangalore. So first off, I'd like to say that if any of you live in gated communities, I pity you. Because you haven't seen any of Bangalore. So Mathikari Extension, which is where this book is set, is a very specific area. There are similar areas in Bangalore, right? So this is not your Malleshwaram, Basavangudi, Jayanagar kind. So an area where the people here, the characters whom he has written about, are those whom he has experienced, right? Because he was living there. If you ask him questions, he'll tell you about all of that. But from the book, you can see that they are very much your working class people, right? And this is also the Bangalore which many of us recognize as being a complete, melting pot of various kinds of communities, languages, right, backgrounds, people from all over coming in here. So I just want to start off by, I told Sundar that I'm going to read one of my favorite sections. You'll get an idea of the book, okay? And you'll also, many of you who are old Bangaloreans will recognize this. Raghavendra was glad when the man left. He was getting tired of speaking so much. Each day, he had to find new words in different languages to communicate. It was no longer possible to live in Bangalore knowing only Kannada. Now remember, this is set in the late 90s, just before 2000, okay? So you'll have to keep that in mind also. It was necessary to know English, Hindi, Malayalam, Tamil, Telugu, and who knew what else? The vegetable sellers spoke Tamil. The rice merchants, Telugu. The garment shop owners, Hindi. The employees at tea shops and bakeries, Malayalam. Leaving only the workers at roadside cycle shops and darshanis to speak in Kannada. He told Purnima, that's his wife, Purni, speaking in all these languages just to pass time. If we had remained in Udupi, no such problems. This Raghavendra is constantly harking back to Udupi, okay? This is the way it was. Old-fashioned. Sundar calls him a loser. I mean, that's a very harsh word to talk about one of the main characters, but anyway. He told Purnima, Purni, yeah, I just read that. She had harumphed, you and your Udupi. There are certain sections where the thought is there, right? It's in italics, right? She's not saying it aloud. But she was secretly glad that her girls were speaking English so well, or so she thought. But Raghavendra was not done. Do you know what Mari told me? That's Mari Muthu. That within the next 10 years, Kannada speakers will become a minority. We will be taken over by the North Indians. Seeing Purnima dismiss this with a smirk, he continued, you think you can get your food then? Your idlis and dosas? It will be all North Indian food. And you have to speak Hindi. Or who knows what language? How would you like that? Purnima liked that very much, thank you. She wanted to eat something different, talk to people in other languages. Her daughters spoke in English with each other and in Hindi with some students at school. How proud she was of them. And here was her husband blabbering about idlis and Hindi. She wanted to give him a suitable riposte, but found that her Hindi did not rise to the occasion. Instead, she said in English, no problem. Does any of you, I mean, Karthik, of course, has been here for a long time as well. So this Bangalore, I was also, all of you in the audience will also have to think about this. Do you recognize this? Is it still very much the same? Even now, because, and these kinds of areas of Mathikere are also still alive, because I happen to live in a place which I could see the parallels immediately between the kind of characters who are there and the people there, and similar kind of a mix of people. But would you want to jump in here at this point?
Okay, so as someone who's lived in Bangalore for a long time, left, came back, etc., and I was away for almost 15, 16 years, between 2000 and 2016, when I think Bangalore completely changed. So when I read What a Day, several things I had to reach back into my memory for certain things, right? The first time I heard about this place called Mathikere was in the late 80s when I was in school, right? And a bunch of boys, all of whose parents worked in Bharat Electronics, all of them came from there. And I think they were moved probably 10 or 15 years earlier. Parents had built a house there, something like that. So my first confusion back in the day, and I remember this distinctly, Mathikere, and I confused Mathikere with Madikeri in Kurk, right? So like, you guys come from Madikeri every day. I mean, you're not serious. And then I had to actually remember, oh no, then I was told, no, Mathikere is here, etc., etc. So my first memories of Mathikere are in the late 80s. We used to cycle from Queens Road, where I lived, right up to RT Nagar, and then cycle across to Mathikere. It was still in the process of being born. There were empty plots. There were people playing cricket and volleyball and all of that. And there were these odd houses where we would go out and call our friends, and then all of us would head off somewhere or the other. So that was my first memory of Mathikere back in the day. And then as I grew up in the 90s, I never went to Mathikere. But oddly enough, about a year ago, I actually went there. And as I was telling Sundar a few minutes ago, I actually became breathless. It is so jam packed now. And I don't just mean the traffic, the buildings, Cheek Bajaul, and there's just so many eateries and everything. And that, in effect, that Matikare I first went to in the late 80s on a cycle, empty with all kinds of makeshift grounds and all of that. And this Matikare I encountered a year ago or so. That is perhaps a story of how Bangalore has transformed in 3 decades. I think we moved 100 years in 30 years, or even perhaps lesser. And I'm thankful that I read this book and I could actually think about all of that, because as you kind of live through your everydays, you forget about what you had once upon a time. And I'm not being nostalgic at all. Nostalgia is a lovely disease I don't want to suffer from. And I mean it when I say it. But yeah, I do think there is something to be said about that Bangalore. And it was interesting for me also, as a person who grew up on Queen's Road, to think that Matikare was also like this famous cantonment of Bangalore. When you said back in the day, maybe up until 15 years ago, I guess, you are from cantonment Bangalore as opposed to city Bangalore, it was actually code for certain things, right? Cantonment Bangalore meant you actually did not know Kannada. That's what you were saying, telling people, because cantonment was, and I'm not going to use the word cosmopolitan here, cantonment spoke in different tongues. There was Dakkani, there was English, there was Telugu, there was Tamil, there was also some Kannada, but you could get by without knowing Kannada. And Matikare was there on the fringes of Bangalore, developing in the same way. Those were my first two reactions to the book. Here you have this old Bangalore, cantonment Bangalore, so to speak, but parallelly, this new Bangalore is being born, and it's kind of reflecting this old Bangalore, but very, very differently.
Yeah, just a quick to pick up from what both of you said. Yeah, for me, the challenge in writing this, for reason for writing this was about trying to find expressions for everyday life, about voices of life and experiences of people who are on the streets, who are people who have been great inspiration for me also as individuals. These boys in doing punctures in cycles, things of that world, which you see every day around you, and you have to engage with it. Now, the problem is how... It's sorry?
Paint shop boy.
Yeah. Yeah, the paint, yeah. And, there's this person who is doing spray paint, and he does not wear any mask. We see it every day. Child. It's there all the time. And it's very subtle there. As usual, you have really picked on it. Because I in the story, I think, I keep saying when he's doing the spray paint, the paint is causing a halo around him. And soon he develops a halo. Basically, he dies. The point is that this kind of existence, how does one write about it? So it's there around us. As both of you said, it's part of a small Bangalore which is reproduced everywhere else. But I think, MG Road and other places which stand for Bangalore today have forgotten this world, which, is very multilingual, which has different kinds of people from different sectors living together, fighting with each other. And the whole thing, of course, is around water, which I will come to. I'm sure you'll come to. But the point I just want to say is, how does one write about this in English? To me, that was the point. Because just like he was saying, cantonment has a particular belief about what kind of people came from. You are very right. Studying here, growing up here, we categorized people from where they came from, right? Palace orchards, then we know what they are and so on. But so when you write about these people, in the same way, there is an association with English writing. The kind of characters who can inhabit an English world, right? And that's why, when Meena wrote to me saying this is like a Kannada book written in English, I said, oh, thank God you said that. Because that's, for me, I write, even my following a prayer was largely about that. It's about this difficulty of working with language I mean, now that there's so much of language politics, for me, the point about the commonality of language, every language is about sound. It originates in sound. It's not about grammar, right? So all of us share those sounds, different languages. So it is that challenge of bringing alive that place, writing it in English so that it doesn't look like you're producing or imposing a framework on it. In other words, for me, the use of English has to be creating our English in order to be able to do it. That's for me the great interest and challenge in doing this. And also, it's a very simple story. As I was telling both of them, I'm a great fan of pulp. So just love reading books which really engage with you in that sense. So I thought I started off thinking I'm going to write a detective story. Everybody's writing detective stories, but it's still they're the most popular. Whatever you say, everybody wants to read detective stories. And nowadays, however boring and bad they are, we read and all kinds of stuff. So it is that ambition is somewhere there in this, but I cannot do a simple detective story. That's not what I am. And also the process of writing really brought out the world in which. So perhaps another point I was trying to say is a detective story set in India has to be different. Set in Bangalore will be fundamental. We cannot do Scotland Yard in Bangalore. They don't. That's not our police are not like that. Our police are. I mean, I've been quite sorry, maybe a bit nasty about them, but yeah, the point is it's our world. How do we engage with it? We can't reproduce these frameworks of what thriller is and what spy is and what detective is. And so we have to produce that language. So that was the great challenge for me. And yeah.
So yes, there is a certain detective element in it, or as one of the characters in it, North Indian boy called Rajesh, he pronounces detective as like a series of clicks of the teeth, right? Detective, right? I could hear him, speak. So there is a certain, element of mystery there. So I don't want to, no spoiler alerts, right? So there is a girl and, so there is this Raghavendra who's sort of trying to find out something about her, right? But obviously that's not the core. So when you talk about water, I'm wondering, because this business of people, I remember in Rajajinagar, not just TGV, but other friends as well, this getting up at 3 in the morning in your own house to catch water. The word is catch. You've said it quite rightly. We all catch water. So you're waiting at 3. Houses are all waking up, right? So here in this novel, of course, it is the public tap, where you have a whole queue of bindiges. You have all the plastic pots and the women there, right? So that's the core. And again, I'm not giving anything away, but I'm just telling you that the Kaveri and the water that comes does play a very moving part in the denouement of the novel, right? And that is something that I really found touching, that whole scene with the women, right? But so do we carry on with water, or are we talking about the locality? I'm kind of wondering now. Yes, please.
No, I mean, and that's another memory for me. I mean, not having running water now for 40 years now. There was a time in Bangalore when we first moved here when we actually got water too. I mean, I didn't. I know my parents did, because we did not have running water throughout the day. So you had to actually catch it, so to speak, store it, and then be careful about it, and so on. And then maybe 2 or 3 years later in our stay here, when my father had an overhead tank built, and then catching became different. Then you had to catch it in the tank that was dug below, and then you had to pump it up to the overhead. So all of those chores, all of that kind of life have escaped our daily lives now. We've probably become more comfortable and so on. But like we were speaking, for many people, it's still a reality. People live among us, probably next door to the flats or gated communities that we live in, who are, I'm sure, still catching water and storing water and rationing water on a daily basis. And that is a truth we forget sometimes, cocooned as we are in our own lives, and our own comforts.
Sorry, just a quick thing to add before I call on Divya. The point about, I mean, so this is something which Bangaloreans, North Bangalore. So we used to, our time break it North and South Bangalore. South Bangalore, you used to get water because Kaveri used to come there first. So Jayanagar people had no problem with water. Malleshwaram, Matikere is, by the way, right opposite Institute of Science, near Ramaya College, that area. So Rajajinagar also. Yeah, so this North Bangalore is water problem. So we actually used to get up early morning to fill the water. Now, when I'm saying we, it's a very generous we. So basically, people are doing it, a woman, right? So it'd be my wife, it'd be other people, other women who are actually doing that job. But it's basically, you have to pick up, somebody has to pick up water at 3 o'clock in the morning, 3:30 order. And many times it won't come. So they'll be standing there. So to me, the whole image of the story arises when women are standing. And it's very interesting. If you look at the sociology of Indian societies, you would live in a locality which is so congested and closed. People know everybody because we're seeing everybody, but we don't know anybody. You don't know who they are, where they are, etc. You know everything about them second-hand. You know they are Malayalis, they are Punjabis, they are from UP, etc. But you may not have talked to them, asked them, what's your name, what are you doing? Or they are not going to call you home for dinner, just like the other Bangalore does, where you have Friday evening parties and all that. It's very interesting. There's a whole, majority of Bangalore, I would say, is like that. So there are all these women meeting together at 3, and when water is not coming, what do? They begin maybe to talk. And in this case, of course, the whole thing is triggered by a woman asking something for another woman. But it can only happen. And I'll tell you, whatever we say about Bangalore, whatever terrible place it has become, Bangalore early mornings is still heaven. 4 o'clock, 4:30, you just have to sit out. That's when the first milk vans come, newspaper boys come. Somebody pulls all these vegetable vendors, get up at 3 every day. Even today, when I talk to those people, they say I push those carts from City Market. They'll come all the way to Malleshwaram, to Jayanagar, etc. That life, that produces another world. So this novel actually exists only in that domain. So much of what happens in that. And therefore, water plays such an important role, because how do we even live with this idea? We would store water in buckets and keep it. That's it. Whole day it'll be like that. Till next time the water comes. So, and that time, none of us were using bottled water to drink at home, etc. It still had to, this negotiation with water. And I was just telling them that, they're saying, no, Bangalore has changed a lot. Just last week in Bangalore, now I'm in JP Nagar, and near Vega Mall, we're walking on Bannerghatta Road. And like everywhere else in Bangalore, it cannot walk, everything has been destroyed. But we had to walk there. And there is a big slum just before Vega Mall. I won't even call it a slum, it's a big inhabitation. There's a community which lives there. And that community of lot of workers, migrant laborers, etc. As we were walking on that Bannerghatta Road, okay, there is a tap outside, and there are all these very colorful plastic buckets. What do you call it? Containers. Yeah, that pots, those plastic pots. People standing in queue to pick up water on the main road, right next to Vega Mall, where all these fancy cars are just zooming by. And this is the day-to-day reality of millions of people in Bangalore. Again, the question is, what does it mean to enter into that world? What does it mean to talk about it in a fictional form? I think that's really the core. Sorry, Divya. Yeah, sure. Yeah, Divya, are you there?
Yeah, hi. It's so lovely to actually hear all of you talk about Bangalore. And I don't feel like coming in because I've never actually lived in Bangalore except for the last 1 decade. But I have been in and out of Bangalore quite often as a visitor because I had lots of relatives here. I'm Telugu speaking. And even today, I'm really sorry I couldn't be there in person today. But even today, when I'm in Bangalore, I pass off my Telugu as Kannada. And quite confidently, to an extent where I once went to fieldwork in Haveri and told everybody in the team, don't worry, I can speak very good Kannada. And then within 10 minutes, I had to call SOS, please send somebody I don't know Kannada. So in Bangalore, all of these languages have existed so beautifully together. And we see that so much in the book because, you're talking about a Malayali, a Tamilian, many North Indians, somebody speaking Telugu. But the conversations are smooth. Everybody's speaking in their broken mix of multiple languages, but it feels like it's one language as if it's a dialect of Bangalore city itself. I also wanted to say, like, I grew up in Bombay, and in my head, Bombay was the cosmopolitan city when I was a child. I never thought of Bangalore as a cosmopolitan city at all. Until I started living here, and with all the many languages, realized how cosmopolitanism itself has certain images that we don't associate to certain neighborhoods and places and languages. In my head, because I was growing up in Bombay, Hindi and English was cosmopolitan. But when I came to Bangalore, I realized Bangalore's cosmopolitanism was so much about all the mix match and the joy people have in communicating in languages that belongs to nobody and everybody in some sense. I also wanted to quickly just say with reference to this idea of migration and language, because I'm also a researcher, and many parts of the book did feel like it was very ethnographic in some sense, right? Like very keen, detailed observations of how people stand in lines, how people communicate with each other. Also, this constant like a simmering distrust amongst people because they are outsiders, but also because they are so dependent on each other, can't help but be friendly with each other in some sense. And I should say that before I read this book, I've read Dr. Sarukkai's other book as well, Following a Prayer, as well as I've read a lot of his other academic work. What's interesting to me is that even in fiction, there is so much of his academic eloquence that just slips in without you having to notice it that this is an academic observation in some sense. So it is like doing sociology through fiction, which I really, really appreciate, especially because I'm a very avid fiction reader and also do sociological research in some sense. I'll pause there, but I'm happy to come back in if we have another round.
No, it's very interesting you mentioned Bombay, etc., because that's connected to the point that I want to make. Actually, you have brought to the surface a Bangalore that not too many people talk about. Bangalore is Silicon Valley. Bangalore is public sector units, which are a little defunct now, but still that is our history. Bangalore is Indian Institute of Science and all of that. But this Bangalore, nobody talks about it. Unlike, say, Mumbai, where Dharavi has a certain, has its own stories and people have made movies on it and it features prominently in many other movies. But this Bangalore, nobody talks about, nobody Matikare or similar such habitations in other parts of the city which are new, developing, working class and so on. Nobody has bothered to talk about it because we are so stuck with Silicon Valley and Vidhan Sauda and all the great things about Bangalore and of course the great Bangalore weather. Yeah, wannabe Singapore, absolutely. So we just can't get past all of that to see that there is beauty here, there are stories here, and there's very interesting things happening here which we perhaps need to look at very closely. And I think that's the great thing about the book.
If I may just add a little bit, it's also very interesting how, even as the city's changing, you see that very minor anxiety among the people who don't have an opportunity to be part of that quickly changing city. So there is this constant reference to, say, the computer city, right? The information technology city, the computer city in the book. And people trying to reinvent themselves because there is no direct sort of involvement in this computer or information technology city. So what do you do with yourself suddenly? You can't continue to be the old school grocery shop, or you can't be. So you're also trying to be something cooler, something newer. You're not going to be a computer person, but what else is the nearest cool thing you can do to be a part of the quickly changing city?
Call your provision store Silicon Provision Stores, perhaps. That's perhaps one way of just buying into that.
Sort of, numerologically set name that sounds cooler than somebody's name actually. These are all very interesting sort of points of how people are trying to fit in so desperately because they don't know how else to be part of a city that's changing in front of their eyes.
Hello, yeah. So the kind of people who inhabit the book, and let me tell you, I mean, from my point of view, plot and character is like something admirable, So, I mean, as a fellow writer, I'm always stuck with plot, okay? But it's beautifully come together, the story. And characters, right? And who are they? This is what he was talking about. They would be your grocery shop, or, those who have provision stores. You should say, actually, not grocery. Actually, they are provision stores, right? The tailor, the carpenter, the clerk who works in Vidhan Sauda, So you have a very different kind of milieu there. And of course, these boys who come to study here from Bihar, right? And what goes on there, right? And actually, I was telling you about, yes, there are Matikares elsewhere. So let me take this opportunity to tell Sundar that, yes, there is a Nagavarapalya where I find parallels, okay? That's where I live. I've been living for 30 years. So you have your Ahmed there, the boy who runs his provision store. So I have my Meena stores just around the corner, run by 4 brothers. So there is a Hidayat and a Mustafa and an Asif and a, Shafi, okay? So Meena, not me, not M-E-E, it's M-I-N-A, as in Makkah, Medina, Meena Mosque, right? If you have a Shahi theatre there was Chetan Talkies. It's now become mall and multiplex. But we still call it the Chetan Talkies Road, right? The road that goes down. So Talkies, I don't know if the young ones know what Talkies are, but anyway. And then you have your Marimuthu, with the snake shrine. You have the Savarna temple, of course, but then you also have the Shani Amma. I thought Shani was Amman though, but I didn't know Shani also. Shani Amma, So with the black parrot, the sculpture of the parrot outside in black, you might, I don't know if you've noticed. Anyway, so that there is that. And the tailor is there, right? So tailors these days, even a tiny hole in the collar tailor will not do repair. You know that? They don't do darning. Oh, wow. You used to go there to, get something shortened or lengthened. No, even they have started sort of saying, no, give me a full work, right? I won't do this side repair which you want to do. Piecework. No. But you can go and get your grinder's gasket spare. You can buy a fancy mixer grinder. But then what if the gasket goes? Are you going to go there to whichever store you bought it from, and then they won't give it to you, right? So you go to a local wala and then he'll say, oh, which one is it? Okay. He'll give you 2 and say, okay, take just 40 rupees. So if this goes, and it works beautifully, right? So your grinder gasket, right? So there is a fellow there to do that, right? You have your fish wala, whom I've known, Syed Afroz, I've known for like 30 years. So he will call you in the morning to say, Amma, ivattu Salman bandide. So you have your connections to these people. And of course, the Mallus, the Mallu provision store, the Mallu bakery, right? Bakeries, So you had those people. The milk booth wala, who I think is Tamil, but he speaks 3 languages. So I really still don't know whether it's a family run thing, the milk booth. Right? So the father, husband, wife, son, then son got married, invitation, then daughter-in-law also comes now into the shop too, So it's milk booth, they sell other things, right? So, I mean, this is the kind of neighborhood we are talking about. So some of you would recognize this, right? But for many of you, it would be another world, right? The kind of worlds that we're talking about, it would be something else altogether. And let me tell you, I live bang opposite a mosque, and the mosque shares the same wall with the temple on the other side. So it's all hunky-dory. And when Ganesha time comes around, the boys come with the donation, right? Donation, so they will go to Meena stores, and Mustafa will tell them, ತಿಪ್ಸಂದ್ರಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡಿದ್ದೀರಾ ನೀವು ಗಣೇಶ ಎಷ್ಟು ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಯು ಶುಡ್ ಡೂ ಇಟ್ ಲೈಕ್ ದ್ಯಾಟ್, ಹಂಗೆ ಆಗಬೇಕು, ನಾಟ್ ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಕಮ್ ಹಿಯರ್ ಫಾರ್ ಮನಿ, ಮಸ್ಟ್ ಯು ಗೆಟ್ ಇಟ್. So the ones who know Kannada know what I mean. So Mustafa will have seen the Ganesha Vandal in this place and say, go and look at how that is done, do it like that, So.
Thank you. I mean, just to add a small bit to this, one part of it was this Matikere is right, as I said, it's outside the gated community of Indian Institute of Science. And there's always every time when I had to go to the office, I had to cross the gate and enter into the campus. And outside is Matikere like this, right? This is the world where there's this temple, which is not a temple in the original sense, where people are taking over temples as lands. There are a lot of very beautiful things about religion which happens there at the subaltern level. But um, there is absolutely no conversation between that gated institute, which has, you know, maybe the people say it's the best institute in the country, etc., and the kind of day-to-day work and problems of the people there. And what is surprising to me, I mean, it's really not about what Science Institute should do. What is surprising to me is about these people knew nothing about what is happening inside that gate. They have really no clue what people are doing, this high-tech research in that institute. They are living right outside, going with about just that bakery or the bakery, you know, which Malayam thing is doing, etc. Yeah.
And Sundar talks about that. He says, if only these people sitting in that institute would do something about sewage and, you know, what are they doing, these scientists, right? There's
Sorry,
that line
I
saying,
had to take that dig on that.
yeah, he had to take a dig.
Yeah, I had to, you know.
Something about sewage and this thing.
Yeah, because it has always been a big, larger debate in science institutions in India on how they should actually help the world around us. But that's a different debate. But as I said, you know, I think this goes back to what Divya was saying about my academy. I really hope none of my academic thing has entered this book, except perhaps my engagement to this question of language and trying to see what is it to say. But, you know, there's this other very interesting thing about these small communities, like the tailor she was talking about. The tailor is a very important role in this thing and very innocent, very nice. And what was very interesting to me about the tailor was, you know, all ladies tailors are young men. So it's like, no, it is really, you know, for me in this novel, it's more like not fun. It's actually true. I mean, it's based on people all around there. Every third place is either a trailer or a provision store. I mean, I must also say that this whole thing is built around different kind of ambition too, of a different world. The ambition of the protagonist of this novel is just to set up a grocery shop. That's all he wants to do. None of the other things, you know, nothing. And for me, perhaps that's a little bit autobiographical. Maybe the greatest thing I want to do is set up a shop and sit there with all the groceries around me, you know. It's a very different world. I don't know, maybe that's my hidden avatar. But that's all he wants to do. And it's so difficult to set up a grocery shop and sit and sell, you know. But why is it difficult? Because every third man in that place wants to set up a grocery shop. And there are small, every house will have some, they are selling some rice, some chilies here, something there. And you are very close friends with them, but you are competitors with them too. But the funny thing about this, I will just stop with this thing. It's not just that the young men are ladies' tailors. So I play around this with the fact that the young men stitch ladies' blouses. Okay? That's to me, you know, this old middle-aged man in Matikere discovers that the tailor is stitching his wife's blouse. And he doesn't understand why is he stitching, because she gives him the old blouse to him and stitch. And he goes to the shop and discovers that blouse there. So my God, why is he handling his wife's blouse? Because he has to take measurement and stitch it. So after all this book came out and all, I was a little bit worried. Oh no, this is set in the late 1990s. Maybe things have changed a lot. Maybe people get upset, not very politically correct and all that. Then I was just going past Jayanagar. There are so many ladies' tailors. So I went particularly looking for ladies' tailor shop. All young men busily stitching and cutting. I did ladies' tailors, you know. So that's, you know, I think these are the stories of which a city is made. And I also wanted to say it's not just, in that sense, it's not just about a locality alone, because I think a city makes us as much as we make the city. It influences, it causes us to behave and act in certain ways. So whether we like it or not about these localities, languages, labor, etc., it reforms each one of us who live in the city. And it is that lived entity of a city that was of interest.
There's an old Sanjeev Kumar movie called Ladies Tailor, in which he is a ladies tailor, Muslim living in Lucknow. And he's privy to secrets, you know, which woman is going to have a baby and which woman is pregnant but not married, because he is, you know, measuring them for various things. But yeah, I really like that bit, what you said, you know, the various contours of a city, the various things that are there in the city and how you kind of take them for granted. But when you perhaps think back, when you're perhaps outside the city, in another city perhaps, or you're thinking back to say, like I was when I read the novel of the 80s or the 90s, which the city has completely changed. You realize that you were actually not thinking about those everyday things at all. And now you're thinking about it, and you wonder how it all came together so nicely. You did not bother to think about certain things. And recently, because of this whole Kamala Hassan bit and this whole Tamil Kannada debate, when I remember in the 1980s, my mother studied Kannada. She went to Kannada classes in the Tamil Sangam, right? So Tamil Sangam was taking Kannada classes, right? And it was normal. I mean, nobody thought it was, oh, we should celebrate this by writing an article about it or a great social media post about it. Nobody thought, I mean, it was just normal. Tamil Sangam in Bangalore decided that they would teach Kannada. Of course, they were teaching Tamil too, but they also taught Kannada. So these kinds of things perhaps escape you the greatness of it, or the terrific way in which they are they've happened. They escape you when they happen. You realize much later that it was actually a terrific thing that happened.
Yeah, I also wanted to talk a little bit about the silent solidarities between various kinds of groups of people in the book. So, for example, the landlords having this strange solidarity with the Bihari young men when everybody else seems to be thinking of them very much like they are the villains of the neighborhood. And at the same time, the little friendships and solidarities around the water tap among the women. And when the women become defiant and say we are not going to get water for you anymore, the men turning up at the taps but struggling to make that solidarity that the women actually build for each other. It's also very interesting to see how much of that life is organized, around state services, because BWSSB has a mention in the book. You see how this young man is trying to impress nurses in the hospital. So it's so much also beyond just the neighborhood in that sense, that the neighborhood is not just homes but all the other things that also come in and out of the neighborhood, and how all of them are constantly also building these strange solidarities, friendships, relationships. If they have a gunda, we'll also come up with our own local gunda. So like there's a solidarity of gundas also in some sense. So I found that sort of, it is a story of migration and language and all of that, but there is also so much undercurrent of how we just build relationships to survive everyday life in cities in some sense. You become friends with people who are not like you, and sometimes you hate them, and then you come around and again become friends with them because you have very little choice in that sense.
I want to talk about the characters, and since you brought up women, but to me the most interesting character who only has a passing role is Commander Bindra. And I find his name and the persona that you have crafted for him really, really funny and scary in a certain sense. And I mean, I'd like to ask you, where did Commander Bindra come from?
This is actually in the story. So there are a lot of these, Bihari and other North Indian students. Basically, the unnamed college in the book is Ramaya College. So a lot of them came to study engineering, and they would all live in our neighborhood. And they were remarkable students. I mean, I think as a teacher, my whole life, I've been most inspired by these students, because I was telling them they used to come from Hindi medium school. They would have studied in Bihar and then land here directly in Ramaya College, engineering, English medium. And they would very wonderfully enter into it. Absolutely. Was one of the students who was the most like Rajesh. He used to read Sidney Sheldon, which he would read it at the dictionary. And he said, I read it because I want to learn English. So somebody told him, read novels and you will, learn English, etc. And these, there are this whole community of people that live, they eat in that one mess will be there, and so they are the ones who introduced me to this Commander Bindra. And for me, Commander Bindra is actually as shadowy as he is in the book. Because whenever there's a problem, they would say, we'll tell Commander. What I understood from that guy was that he was like the protector. Like when they felt, there is already, even in the 90s, there's some tension. Already some tension who are outsiders, insiders. And he was a person who would not only protect them if there is any problem, he was actually supplying country-made guns. And I mean, it looks very big and dangerous. These are country-made guns, are quite, useless in some sense. They just shoot, they make some... Sure. They may be as dangerous, yeah. But he used to apparently, so this is a story I used to hear. He would bring country-made guns from Bihar and sell it to these local chaps there. And I must also say that in today's Bangalore, these micro breweries have become so famous, right? But the real Bangalore invention is something called B&R, bar and restaurant. And there are so many bars. You say VBR. In fact, to make fun of my friend Holla, we always call his house HBR, Holla Bar and Restaurant, because even bar and restaurant signifies a lot of real shady, red light, dirty tables. People all sitting, all be, and the kind of people we're sitting, they'll all be sitting and eating one chicken piece and one drink, and old monk, of course. Yeah, usually old monk. And that is our origin. Much before this fellow started microbrewery, they were all there in every round. All these bar and restaurants with the panwala outside. That is, and for this, the thing about Commander Bindra, where I've extrapolated him, was to say, other than him doing this, so I was imagining his state of mind, and that's what that's an addition to it. The fact is, Commander Bindra thinks Bangalore is a wimpy, feminine city, because he thinks Bangalore could be so much more. It could be like Bombay, it could be like Bihar. And he says, what are these Bangaloreans doing? They're wimpy people, they're very nice. And as he says, even their language is so slow, unlike their Hindi, with all this other thing. He thinks, what is wrong with these people? They should be they should be somewhere else than where they are. So it is this belief that they can actually inhabit the space and make this a better place. Not necessarily on the model of other things, in their own sense. And it goes back to a very fundamental question about migration and the tension between what is our vision of Bangalore today? Why is microbrewery, and for these young people, that has come to stand for such an important part of Bangalore? That school kids and college kids today, where do they go? They just go to these pubs. All over Bangalore, everywhere. That has become the model of what the nature of a city should be. I'm not saying it's right or good or bad, but we used to do much worse things perhaps in our old Bangalore city. But I'm saying the way the city changes ourselves. It's not just about some inanimate city being somewhere there. How it modifies our own self-understanding, our own basic sense of self, who we are.
I wonder if that commander name came from a brand of rum he favored.
They used to call him Gavander.
No, I'm just saying, because there were all these cheap brands of rum, Commander, Bahadur, stuff like that. No, it's interesting you mentioned bar and restaurant, because when I was working in Bangalore in the late 90s, someone used to live very far away and he say, there are no restaurants where I live. So every night I have to eat at a bar. Think, you're eating at a bar? When we used to make fun of him. So he was telling us something, and I don't just eat at a bar, I also do other fun things, whereas you guys go home and eat curd rice, but I am eating at a bar.
Yeah, I also want to just draw attention to the book cover. Actually, both your book covers have this, in this case, water, the other one literally as if a prayer going upwards, but both filled with letters from different languages. I mean, that one perhaps Kannada and this one with multiple languages. Tell us a little bit about this obsession with languages, because a lot of the story and the way it unfolds is also through this kind of communication between people and the mixing of different languages. So tell us a little bit about how you see language and what is that? How do you bring that into fiction? And what does it take to write characters who speak different languages but write it all in English?
Okay, you really come to the core of a lot of my obsession of many years of. I remember my first book, more academic in philosophy, was actually called Translating the World, Science and Language. It began with the question of how science uses the idea of language, what is so special to it, and of course, what is special to mathematics and so on. And then later on, with much of my work, even in social science, at some level, it keeps coming back to this extremely interesting thing called language. Where does it come from? Where is the spring of language? What does it actually thing? The cover. That language is actually not directly from, it is by a very close friend of mine who grew up with me in Malaysia, who's a filmmaker now and then doing other things. His name is Srinivas Bhashyam. So when he used to do this, posters like thing with these alphabets. So he had done a series earlier. And so when I wanted, and we used to, write together earlier. When Meena was at City Tab, we have written pieces together on Malleshwaram railway station, Bangalore Central Jail and all that. So when this came, so obviously, this has been our dream to do this together. So I told him, how would you imagine this thing? So he used that motive he was working with in his posters, which is working with various languages. And that's definitely influenced by this multilingual Bangalore and the tension, what language should Bangalore speak, So that is where the origin of it. And since he continued, he is the one who did for this thing also, we thought he wanted something a little more standing out and working around this question of thing. So definitely the tap has water dripping typically. So it's actually words and languages and alphabets which drip out. So it's very, some kind of a jump there. But largely, so my question about language is really about this, that one, I'm trying to see how to say this without offending anybody. No, in the sense about, largely what I mean by offending is that it's always tricky to talk about language anyway. Not just about Kannada and Hindi or English, Kannada and Tamil or whatever, but even about English, writing in English. So to me, every time if you ask me what is this language of this book, I often used to say, it sounds like a bit of a fake thing, but I used to say, this is a Kannada book written in English. For me, Following a Prayer is definitely a Kannada book written in English. Its imagination is Kannada, its words are Kannada. But some Kannada people get very upset about that because they think that language has a monopoly over stories. That, for example, that writing about these characters, and it's part of one of the reasons you said, it's like a Kannada novel written in English, because you think it's only Kannada novel which will write about this subaltern world, this real everyday life. Because maybe English does not have that capacity to capture it, or maybe our expectations of being an English writer in English in India is a problem. And every time I have this struggle with people, including editors and others, is to give me the freedom to produce bad English, quote unquote, or broken English, or struggling. I want to twist English. I want to make English speak in Kannada. How do I do that? Not because writing is easy, actually. For me to write it is easy. How do you get people who think we should write Indian English in this proper British manner, for example? How do you convince them, no, look, we have to produce our own English? And the British have been very good at it. Very innovative books among British writers, for example, Caribbean writers in Britain, or the Cockney, right? Even very famous books like, Clockwork
Movies
Orange.
for that matter.
Huh?
Movies.
So you allow that space. But if we write it, it's far more easier for us to think we are translating. You can actually write awkward English, quote unquote awkward English, if you translate from Kannada and Tamil and say, this is a translated book. For me, I want to see all my books as translated. I am the translator, I am the author, everything. That's what it is. Because there is a translation happening in each one of us. Then how do we then write this? So this is a very deep struggle, I think, about. And that's why when people say English is not a language of India, etc., these are all questions we need to ask. What is the English we want to take control of?
It's very interesting you mentioned this bit about Indian English. One of the first books I read, translated books I read, was by Vaikom Mohammad Bashir, right? And I think it was called Me Grandad Had an Elephant. It was written in the North Kerala Malayalam originally. And I think the translator was one Mr. Abdullah, a very well-known translator. He actually used the African American language to capture the nuances of that variety of Malayalam into English. So that's the only way, he said, I can try and reproduce how that language sounds to the ordinary Malayali who speaks what we call standard Malayalam. So if I use this African American kind of English, then you will, as a person who speaks standard English, you'll appreciate the nuances. It's an interesting choice. Of course, you can criticize it, critique it, whatever. But yeah, I see your struggle. How do you write Indian in English?
So talking about, I suppose it is in dialogue that this really comes out, right? you can hear the Kannada at least. If you say, Purnima, when she came to know of the name of their agency, asked Raghavendra, why, for God's sake, why Raghu? What is this in between? You're a sheep or what? And who's Nagaraj to decide all this? You are the owner, you are taking your house as the office. What has he done? What is he going to do for you? And what is this detective? You think you are the police? Why did you get caught in all this? I thought both of you are planning some business together. You said, surprise, wait, surprise. Now I'm surprised, very surprised. I think you have forgotten that you're married, have 2 daughters to take care of. The way Purnima talked, every time she stopped, she created a monstrous pause. It was a pause that was clear and loud. It stayed around the ears, readying them for the next burst. So I can hear Purnima.
In Kannada.
If I may add, I just had one question. When I was in college in the 2000s, I studied English literature, and that time, what was taught to us in literature was post-colonial English literature, right? So that was Indian writing in English, African writing in English, but it was together post-colonial. So we read English that stood for English all over India, as if there couldn't be dialects within English across our cities. Now, so I wanted to ask you that, do you think that is why certain authors are able to write about certain neighborhoods and certain authors are only able to write about cities and not so much about neighborhoods? Because to write about a neighborhood, you need to break grammar and language and dialects. Whereas to write about cities, you can perhaps just have a standardized English, because then you're zooming out to just talk about the city in general. But if you want to write and root it in a particular neighborhood, you need to think, talk in multiple languages at the same time and break all rules of what we traditionally think of grammar and language in some sense.
Yeah, I think that is yeah. So the point is, I'm not saying that one could have written this in I don't know what is traditional English, or let's say editorially acceptable English. Okay, so editors are not going to jump at you every time. Change this, change that. Sorry, that's your job. I understand, but it also, so it's a struggle, right? I want to have my freedom for expression, but they are worried that they're going to say, oh, what is this terribly bad constructed English? How did they publish it? So I understand that tension. But the point is, I'm not saying that if one couldn't write this in very quote unquote elegant British English. I don't think that's actually that difficult. But for me, the question is about my capacity to be driven by that story. Why am I even writing it, right? What is it that drives me to write this story? So in that, for me, I'm immersed in that world of language. So English is just the medium to express that. And I don't see this English as if it's constrained. I know that the fight will come with the editors later, and maybe they won't publish it at all. I used to write novels much earlier before I did any of this, and editors never even replied to me. So so it's another old story about it. But the point is, so we do it because, that was, I think that search for that. I'm not saying even if you write it in the so-called proper English, that there is no search and that's not authentic. So I wouldn't want to say that. But I do think that these raise new challenges. And for me, it's even to write about the city, just about everyday life. So in conversations, the linguistic terms are very clear. But for me, even in descriptions, where does that imagination come in? How does that English actually manifest itself? Even in my own descriptions of it and so on. Yeah.
Well, I did notice exactly what you're talking about and made a whole set of examples. The only problem here is, Sundar, these are sentences, expressions, imagery especially, which I can see a Kannada person writing. But if I were taking a class, which I will be shortly, in Mount Carmel, they keep asking for this and that. So editing class, I would say, this is not the way to write, right? You get it? Huh? So if I'm talking to a Mount Carmel thing, I will use this as an example of someone saying raindrops lowered themselves along his forehead as unloading cargoes. I would say, no. This is too convoluted, right? I would say that. Or if you say, after he falls down, his palms made a cylinder of the slush, and brown mud made galactic patterns on his spectacles. So I'm like, I've got this question mark in Kannada. Okay. Now, this is a classic one. I think this is definitely Kannada. How Purnima had washed, wrung, and dried Raghavendra's pretensions before his eyes. Didn't you think in Kannada when you wrote that sentence? I'm just thinking. Ella. So these are the kinds of examples. Her giggle suddenly splattered into an idea. Okay. So I mean, these are things that if you're, teaching, youngsters how to, write tight prose and all of that. I mean, these would be. So I have a feeling this is the kind of clash that would be happening, right? With publishers.
Correct. But for me, all of it is driven by the fact I'm not, in a sense, in my mind at least, I don't think I'm doing it artificially, like I'm trying to construct. No, what I'm saying is that I'm trying to make the different thing. Yeah, no, why I'm saying that is, it arises from one particular aspect, which is, to me, the question is language just used as a medium to tell a story? Or does language by itself produce that story? For me, I don't see language. I don't have language. I'm not saying we can't do it as this. I mean, this may be a deeper philosophical. This is only philosophical question which may be behind. No other academic philosophical stuff in this book, I think, directly. But this question of, is the language, is there a story and then language is, I have the language to represent it to you? Or is it in my very act of writing, I'm producing that story? So to me, language is active and agent. I am not the agent. I am not the writer. And I'm not trying to be pretentious in saying this. Like some writers would like to say, oh, language wrote itself. For me, it is a genuine puzzle. So how do I let that language speak itself? How do I let it say what it wants to? So in fact, rather than me being the agent of writing this, I want to be as an agent who does not come as an obstacle to the expression of language. The only obstacle is, of course, editors. That is, and you need good editors. I mean, I had a wonderful editor, Karthika, so I could do this. But yeah.
No, I mean, just think about this. R.K. Narayan wrote all his Malgudi stories in English, but then when they were telecast on Doordarshan, they were all telecast in Hindi, right? They were made in Hindi. It was clearly set in South India. It had South Indian actors all speaking Hindi like they were speaking Kannada or Tamil, of a text that was originally written in English. So there's a lot of creative tension, language tension, so to speak there. So, and I think that represents the soul of India and its, linguistic diversity.
I also wanted to quickly add that language is not just, medium of communication here between characters, but it is their personalities also. My favorite one being the cameo of Balegowda, right? Where his name is named after a small banana, Chikka Balegowda. And then so when you see the person, you hear the name, and then there is so much language just within a name. It's not just about two people talking, but his personality is now. And across South India, we have these names which are people named after objects and deities and everyday items. Alcohol, because somebody had prayed to God that if I have a son, I'll leave alcohol, but I'll name my son alcohol. So all kinds of names being given to people, which outside of that state would make no sense to anybody. But within the state, you would not think twice before calling somebody by that name, because the language and the person are just so clearly fitting with each other, and the logic that the parents thought behind naming somebody like that. Try explaining that to somebody outside of the state. It's the most complicated thing then. So I find like it's really interesting to see language play out in just beyond communication also, places and people and objects and so on.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you. It was such a lively session, and I think the whole issue of language that you've been talking about is very profound and something which many English writers struggle with as we try to write about the city and about communities that extend into different strata of society. So thank you for that, and I shall take all of that with me when I go back to looking at my writing. So I had a question that related to, that sort of came from that moment when you said that IISc is so separate from, the campus is so separated from the area around it, and which is true, I think, of most campuses, the IITs, the Sonipaths, et cetera, where you create this bubble for academic brilliance, but you separate yourself. So I wanted to ask you, How, I mean, I haven't read the book, obviously, but how distanced you felt as you were writing about this because you're observing, right? So how distanced you felt from the community and how immersed? And also, more importantly, how do you think the community, the people you've written about, would receive this novel about themselves?
Um, I was actually very deeply involved in that cultural world. So for me, Mathikara is very close to my heart. Living there in that world really opened up a completely different set of experiences. I grew up in Bangalore in Malleshwaram, and Mathikara is so different from Malleshwaram. And at that time in which we had all these people come, and for me it was really great. Opening up to have Guptaji's mess, to have one, roti and aloo and in some whatever dish they make, everything they made tasted different. Everything they made looked very, very interesting and very nice. And I must say that one thing we didn't talk about, because there are many things about Bangalore we should talk about, but because it's Bangalore, we have to talk about food. They are so obsessed about food, right? I don't think anywhere else we get this kind of bakery, chow chow bath, masala puri. I mean, how many carts of masala puri I have gone even today searching for that masala puri we used to get in those days. So it's there, that eating thing is so much a part of it, right? So yeah, that is that kind of experience. Sorry, I think I went off on track from.
No, perfectly all right. No, it's I mean, clear that that you were
Yeah,
immersed
so
in
I
the
was
neighborhood.
involved.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. So I very much involved in the cultural world of it, and the story is then imagined and built around it. And I realized much later after I wrote. It was actually my wife who reminded me about it. She said, "I said, why did I write about this girl dying?" And I didn't remember explicitly, but apparently when we were there, somewhere we had heard a news in one of those houses a girl had died. And then that became some trigger, I think, for me. So there is one sense of non, but the other sense of being an outsider looking in this sense, although I was working in the IISc campus, I never saw myself as representing IISc in any sense. One, because I was in the humanities thing. I was at NIAS doing philosophy. I was anyway an outsider. And anyway, that put NIAS at the edge of the IISc to keep us almost out. So all that was anyway happening, so that's okay. But I think but a lot of my professional work has been on studying science institutes, largely from philosophy of science and sociology of science. So this was if I had allowed myself to write, I'd have written a lot more about the inner IISc and what is happening outside. But I controlled myself enormously. Just to make one point about this alienation, and IISc is very sensitive about it. Today, if you see, and unlike earlier, now every few weeks you will see in at least in Deccan front page, there will be one news item. One professor has, like most recently, that professor has built that bridge in Kashmir. Then somebody is doing something on roads. These are not really hardcore, so-called hardcore science. These are all about science, water, road. They are designing roads and highways in Bangalore and so on. So they also realize that they need to do, but they are two different worlds. They are just, they don't understand it at all. And and what they don't understand is how much this social world changes it. I'll just end with a very small anecdote. There is this entry to IISc in the Marama temple. There's a main entrance, the other one, right? So there is this temple where it used to be a very small place where people they actually come to pour milk on that until for that. Some people used to do that. So married women would go. Now it's become a huge temple. They're making worship for all cars and all that, right? That place, I used to go enter IISc through that when I came from Malaysia. There's a circle there. So once I was doing a piece for Outlook, and they wanted to do something on religion and etc. And they asked me to do something on the thing, and I'd been thinking about praying, offering prayers to machines is a larger theme. What is it that is happening here right outside IISc? But what fell in place for me, the whole article, was when I was standing in the circle, wanting to enter that place where they're waiting for the traffic to be. And then I knew that circle was called Marama Circle. So everybody in our institute would call it Marama Circle. The postman would call it Marama Circle. So I was standing there at Marama Circle, and then in the corner there's a real name of the circle written there. It's faded, it was being covered by some trees and leaves. It was called C.V. Raman Circle. So to me, it captured the real tension between what was named for a scientist and now taken over by Marama, who is far more powerful, and everybody knows only Marama knows C.V. Raman, poor chap, you know. So that, I think many of our institutions don't have a clue about. I mean, I think that disjunction between our so-called higher or I'm saying this even with social science humanities institutes are very, you know, they see themselves very academic institutes, that distance from the ground. Not true with IIHS though. I hope.
Yeah, wonderful discussion on the language. So I read your book, Following Prayer, and there, like you mentioned, that the protagonist stops speaking because she feels that language is the beginning of all the problems. And here we're talking about kind of all languages mixing together. So are you in some way trying to kind of bring the other aspect of language, because there you made her not speak, and here you are trying to bring an amalgamation of language?
Yeah. Oh God. No, why I say that, oh God, is because, that was actually a larger existential question about language that I had. Can humans lie without language? So, and I can't say it as an adult. If I say it, all of you will throw me out and get very upset at me. But as a child, I can say it, at least in the book. So the protagonist, who is a 12-year-old girl, can say, all language is a lie. I refuse to give in to this story of lies and I'm not going to speak. Okay. But she's saying it in the context of truth and religion, gods, and so on, right? So that's okay. Here, it is not even a reflective work on language like Following a Prayer is. And the reason is actually quite simple, which I didn't mention. It is that Following a Prayer, although it was published first, it was written after this book. So, like all writers who never get their earlier books published, till they publish one book, not because this book is better or worse, because at least editors will reply to us, early. So that is the only point. So in that sense, this is an older book. So where this was not a preoccupation. In fact, my whole point about this was to write a book because I was so angry at that time. Not angry in that sense, but I'd written a very interesting, in my view of as a writer, a very interesting, not experimental, very passionate novel called Paris Madras. And I realized want to get even people to read it, etc., was very difficult and so on. It's a very readable book in my view. It's also a little bit philosophical, okay? So then I said, then I'll write the genre I want to write. If people won't publish all this, I'll write pulp. So I began writing this as pulp. Unfortunately, not real pulp. One of my friends was reading it saying, where are all the steamy scenes? You don't have it till then. So I know, maybe my next book I'm going to try that. But the point is that, so this did not even begin from the kind of inquiry that novel started off with. So maybe that is the evolution of my thought on language in a sense.
If there are steamy scenes in your next book, editors will be standing in line to publish it. I guarantee you that.
Just make sure you read your Sidney Sheldon.
Yeah, thanks, first of all, Sundar, for the book. I look forward to reading it. And thank you all for your comments. My question sort of goes back to what you were talking about at the beginning, how Bangalore has changed. I first came to Bangalore in 1991. I've been coming since then and moved here permanently about 6 years ago. And my beat is Matikeri, Sanjay Nagar, Arti Nagar, and so on, and the area around there. Something that impressed me since I've known it is the different character of each of these really neighboring neighborhoods. And I see them changing. I see, for example, Ramaya has grown huge, and the neighborhood around Sanjay Nagar has grown and changed in many ways. But I still feel a large sense of identity. I still feel that each of these neighborhoods has a strong sense of identity, even though it's a changing one. How do you observe that?
Yeah, this is actually quite interesting on what kind of identity formation happens. Many of these places, like what Meena was saying, and this and many other smaller places, they were actually like village communities, right, earlier. So you'd have one big cow, person, the person who sells milk, and he'll have 3-4 cows. It'll be half of it living on the road, other half of the dung will be thrown on the other side, and that's the way it was. And around it, auto show, everything was around. That character of one community, caste community. So to me, as if you want to put a sociological angle on this, what really interests me is the question of reformation of caste communities here. Many of which were ordered around caste lines get diffused through basically pure questions of trade and commerce. Setting up these small shops here for something or the other, definitely one hospital will come. And then, those kind of stuff slowly start, and electrician will be there on hardware shop. Like that it begins, and eating joints. And I saw Matikere radically change in the few years I was there. From that particular kind of a cohesive, one kind of community, people who had come. Some of them would have come from some parts of, like, say, Tumkur, Kolar. Radically changed in a very few years. And today, when I go see the Matikere, after I'd moved out and I went one day, it was so different. Because even the stuff which was not there earlier, I mean, today now it's become a fetish of naming every dish with some cities or towns name, right? So like Telicheri biryani, then Hyderabad biryani, and this and that. So there are so many Kerala restaurants with different names here, selling this, selling that. So I think it has undergone. But then the question is, where does the sense of community come from? And I think that is really from a shared lived experience of the kind of world, like, for example, water. And that's what was very interesting to me about Indian communities like this. The people are not friendly. I wouldn't want to romanticize by saying all neighbors are very friendly and all. Not at all. They are going around the work, they have hundreds of things to do, they'll pick up their water and go. They won't know the names of their people who have come there. But that, what Divya was saying, that sense of solidarity and comradeship, which happens in events, not as I know you all the time, you come on Friday party and all, no. But every time you come to that tap and collect water, there is something which you say. You'll say something about some kid or something, and then go off. And then there's nothing. So moments of action, moments of sufferance brings people momentarily together as solidarity, as fellowship. That's all. But they'll be really bitching about them, like, oh, they are all Hindi fellows who have come here. Where did all these Mallus come? That may also happen. I think that was the interesting question. And that's why, we didn't mention this, so I'll mention it in case some other editors will point out that the first page itself there's a spelling mistake. Okay, it begins, and that too in bold letters. You saw that, is it? It's okay. Let me also say, since we are on camera, it's not a spelling mistake. It's purpose. It's called. There's no prologue to the book. It's called prelogue. So, as I said, thankfully Karthik has been so accommodative. So she said, "What is this prelogue?" And I said, because I wanted a prologue for the book to lead to the story. And that prologue is very simple. It asks a very simple question: what is the mother tongue of a city? So, Karthika said, this, because of all your experiments with all these questions of language and all, it'd be nice to have a small note. So I said, I'll do a note, but that note is not a preface. I don't want it to be seen as a preface. I want it as integral to the story. I want to call it prologue. And she said, it's not really a prologue. So I said, it's really not a preface. So I called it prelogue. And I just want to alert you, it's not a spelling mistake. It's a deliberate, that's the kind of work with language, I think, which we need to do. So that question, the prelogue is actually about what is the mother tongue of Bangalore? And the fact is, that's a very different question. It's not about how many people speak, Kannada. And this is, as you said, the tension has become so much. Every time I go in auto or, Uber or anything, every time there's a Kannada driver, they will tell me about how Hindi people have taken over Bangalore. The other day, I met somebody who was a very old resident of Bangalore for generations. And the first thing she tells me when she meets me, I don't know, we just talking, as usual, whenever we meet, how is the traffic so terrible, right? But the first thing she said, do you know that now Kannada speakers are less than 40%? I said, wow, that is, yeah, but the point that it is so much in our mind then makes you ask the question, what is the language of a city? And what is its relation? I'm not saying it's not Kannada. I'm not saying it's not Hindi, Tamil, I don't know. What I'm trying to say is, what is the relationship between the idea of how the city speaks to us and our own human tongue in that sense? So in that sense, it's a greater understanding of how we want to think.
It's interesting, this auto driver business. Because when I moved to Delhi in 2000, and maybe 2 or 3 years after that, a couple of friends came. One friend came from Bangalore. Said, "How is Bangalore?" "Oh, it's changed. All the auto drivers are speaking in Hindi." And his next sentence was, "They've stopped speaking English." Right?
Yeah, you were saying that?
No, on a lighter note, I just wanted to say that given all this tension in language, maybe the BWSSB is going to take some credit for using the tap as a way to get people from different languages to actually talk to each other. I hope that's not what they get out of it.
Yeah. No, so.
Yeah, hi. So I've lived in, although I'm a Tamilian, I've lived in different parts of India. So I used to say there was a open pannu, and everybody would be clueless. So my question was, there's this recent observation. Don't know whether it's statistically true. I'm part of many writers forums, and one thing they're saying that the number of writers, highest number of writers are emerging from Bangalore in India. It's no more Calcutta, right? The Bengali intellectual and the Mallu intellectual, that stereotype is somewhat. This is to do with writing in English. I'm just wondering if, like you just said, that there is something to do with story being associated with language, because whether you live in Maharashtra, whether you go to Delhi or Bombay or Calcutta, somehow, whether it's the music or the dance or food, it's intermingling. Whether you're a Malayali or, or a Tamilian living in Delhi, when you speak Hindi, even in your broken accented Hindi, your whole batata puri, everything, just gets mixed. But somehow with Bangalore, when I moved to Bangalore, I moved in my 20s and I'm in 40s now. I made my first friends were all Kannadigas, right? And they were all heavily into literature. One thing I noticed is many of them didn't speak in Kannada, right? Even people who have lived in Karnataka, in Bangalore for 25, 30 years from other communities, even those who have integrated well, so-called integrated, the imagination is not, like you say, it's hodgepodge, but it's not very, there is no character to Bangalore as such, right? It's so disparate in that sense. No, please don't, this is just my observation. When I say character, not in a moral sense, I'm just talking about a linguistic character, right? I've chosen to live in Bangalore for 15 years, so there must be some sense of belonging. So I'm just trying to understand whether this whole question around language and story, because you find a lot of people who are writing in English here, they're writing about trauma, they're writing about urban loneliness, but somehow, even if they've lived here for 15, 20 years, they're not sort of writing about
Bangalore.
Yeah, and strangely, like even people I know who came here in the 90s, especially from IT sector, they've never heard of they can't quote a single Kannada writer. Right? I'm talking about people who are extremely well-read. These are people whom I'm quoting are exceptionally well-read. They're still talking about French cinema. And, so there is something about Bangalore, even among the very literary, knowledgeable people who have lived here for 30 years, they're living in some other space. Yeah. Whereas an intellectual sitting in Delhi or a Bombay or Calcutta, they're very integrated. Yeah. Right? They will talk about RSS. They will know what Lavani is. They will know how vada pav is made. There's so much of so that politics, the language, the music, everything gets into their skin, right? And I have been a journalist in Delhi, so I know, I've grown up in North India, so I know what it is. So I'm just wondering, I'm just thinking about it. Just an observation.
Very, very interesting observation, because a couple of years back, when Following a Prayer came, Vivek Menezes, who does a Goa Lit Fest, so he had a book discussion with me in one of the Goa bookstores. And while we were talking, he said, what is it about Bangalore that there is no Bangalore novel? That's what he meant is very similar to what you're saying. That's like that Bombay novel that Mehta. No, the other one, Maximum City. Something, a novel, yeah. Like that kind of thing which captures, or that what you call as a character, right? The idea that there is something about Bangalore as a city which becomes the character of the novel itself. I'm changing the meaning of the word character here. But he said that, and I was really puzzled. Puzzled in the sense, I didn't know enough about it. I know that there are, as you said, novels set in Bangalore. We are in the midst of writers, including Meena. So I wouldn't say there are no Bangalore novels. As I said, I didn't know. I was telling him I find it surprising. But one of the things I told him after this novel is that, okay, here is one example of what a Bangalore novel could be. It is not definitely Bangalore novel, whatever. But the point is, I want Bangalore to be the character here, in that sense of the word. It's not just about people's story or about internal, as you said, trauma or internal dynamics of things. The city has to be an integral part of it. And I think there's a larger question of what is the identity of a city, not just of neighborhoods. I was in a meeting with some very well-known people whose name I won't mention within NIAS and IIHS. The meeting was actually about building a landmark in Bangalore, because they were saying Bangalore doesn't have a landmark. And they said, we need something like Eiffel Tower or whatever thing, something. And that's the reason DKS is building this thing now. This, whatever this huge something he's thinking of, because they think the way to make Bangalore special is to build a landmark. So, and that what is interesting is, it is reflecting that point that what is unique about Bangalore they couldn't capture and think, which is not true, as you say, with other parts of Karnataka. I know what Malnad is. I know what South Canara is. I know what North Karnataka is. Even Mysore has
No, about the Bangalore novel, there's a Malayalam movie called Bangalore Days. Right? These three protagonists, they come to Bangalore and this thing. And if you see movies of the 80s and 90s, Tamil movies of the 80s and 90s, and you can laugh at this if you want, but I've had it confirmed by more than one Madrasi. They say, we will go to Bangalore in the same vein that they say, we will go to Las Vegas. Right? That's what actually they mean. They're coming to Bangalore to have fun, which they cannot have in Madras or Coimbatore or wherever it is these Tamil movies are set in. So there is a character of the city. It is seen in a certain way by these three Bangalore students, these three Malayali students who come of age in Bangalore. And it's a 2015 movie. Or it's seen in some of these Tamil films where they say, we will go to Bangalore, like the way we are going to party. So that is perhaps one character of the city in outsiders. About people in the city, I'm sure you'll come up with many answers.
I mean, like I'm saying, if people like to, if you go to Chennai, Delhi, they at least talk about some artist, some politician, some musician or someone there, right?
I wonder if it's a function of also where you choose to live in Bangalore. If you lived in Baswangudi, if you lived in, somewhere there, perhaps you'll be more in tune with Kannada and its writers and so on and so forth.
I'm a very good Bangalorean. I lived in Bangalore. My family is from Bangalore. I grew up in Bangalore. Of course, I was away in Trivandrum for about 20 years and all that. What happens is that Bangalore is continuously evolving. If you look at it, right from, Kempegowda, before that there were the Kurubas who were living here. There were people that, Bangalore has a lot of character. I don't agree that it doesn't have character. It has so much character. And language has never been a problem before. Everybody was kind of speaking in every language, as you correctly said. So why is it a problem right now? If you talk to the auto rickshaw drivers also, one of the things they say, I know Hindi, I know Malayalam, I know Kannada, I know every language. But it's when people talk very arrogantly to me, and when they say in a very rude manner, or behave that way. So naturally, people react. So when I went to Trivandrum first, I really didn't know even one word of Malayalam. And in Trivandrum, which is the capital of Kerala, nobody spoke any language except Malayalam. They knew all the languages, but as a matter of pride, they did not speak in any other language. It is only when you learn to speak a few words of the language of the place where you're living in, then the whole world opens up to you.
Yeah.
And as a journalist, I've been to every place you can think of, the slums, the fishing colonies, the Maharaja's house. You know, you don't have any place that you don't go to. And it teaches you so much about people. So about Bangalore, there not being any novels, there are a lot of films made about Bangalore, like Karthik said. You know, not only this Bangalore Days, but even right now there was one latest Malayalam film in which that, you know, Avesham, there were so many like that. And Tamil films also, many about Bangalore. Kannada films, of course, there are always many of them. Maybe there, and you know, there are so many of these YouTube fellows also who come and make. So I think Bangalore is one of the maximum places where they come and they make. So it's actually got a lot of character of its own, but it's not one character. It's got several characters, you know. And I think that's a great thing. I mean, that is what makes a cost. Yeah, that's not being celebrated. Yeah. So that's what makes for
Bombay.
Yeah.
But you don't celebrate the male spirits of Bangalore. Not yet. I'm sure
it'll happen.
It'll happen eventually.
I mean, it's always been what you call a cosmopolitan city. There was the cantonment, there were the, you know, the old city, everything. And having lived in various parts of Bangalore all my life, right from Basungudi to Sadashiv, I think, you know, that each place has its own character. And each place has its own language, which is not necessarily Kannada, Tamil, Telugu, Hindi, nothing. It's just
more interesting. Each place has its own taste of idli and chutney.
Which to me is the most important character of Bangalore.
Absolutely.
Masala dosa.
Food, you can never get food like Bangalore.
Sambar, correct. Exactly.
Okay.
Since you are talking about, you know, water days, I have been living in Sadashnagar from 1969. And, you know, the Kaveri started coming from south of Bangalore, and Sadashinagar was the last place to get Kaveri water. Until that, we were getting from Tipkodnalli. Okay. Only during rainy season, a month after rainy season, we would get water. Otherwise, water is always a problem here. Okay. So I still remember my grandparents would stay in Malleshwaram. I used to take standard 10 car of my father, go there, fill up water and come. This was the story. Because it was water days, once you mentioned, I started remembering those days. Today, of course, it is Kaveri water, but it was the reality even here. And though not tap water, it was a different kind of water problem at that time. And to add to this character of language, I have my own experiences on this character. I was an executive in Bosch. I was sent to Jaipur to set up the plant, Bosch plant in Jaipur. And we had, because it was a brand new plant, all the talent went from here. And in fact, for 2.5 years, we only spoke Kannada there. With the workmen in Hindi, but otherwise all administrative, important conversations, difficult technical challenges were all talked in Kannada only, but conversation with the other people were Hindi. Later on, in 13, I was sent to Pune to set right a loss-making plant. And the complete team was selected by the top management to go there. I was the MD of that company at there. Except 2 people, one from Bihar and one from Tamil Nadu. Everybody else was Kannada. Same thing happened there. We turned around the company, made it profitable. Everything was in Kannada. I know. But the best part is the locals understood that they are trying to solve a bigger problem. They didn't antagonize it. But they still value our work very with great regard, even both in Jaipur and here. Even when I go there today, they appreciate and they talk very well of us. So this language, how you use the language matters most, you know. If you use it arrogantly, as she mentioned, you have a problem. But use it language to synchronize events for a purpose, then it's a different take altogether. This is, I think, my learning from language, this thing. But I also have a point here. Why the Kannadigas, especially me, also have recently developed this sort of a, because many people, senior people come to Bangalore, live there here for 40 years.
They go to Germany, learn German language. Go to France, learn French language. Here they don't even learn 200 words of Kannada. This
200, that's a lot.
So why is it is the question I have. When you can go and learn other languages easily, you don't want to. That means it's a matter of attitude, not the competence. You know, this raises a question. Why?
Okay. Thank you so much. And do follow IIHS on social media and sign up for our newsletter. We have an event every month. So we'd love to see you come back. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.